The SCP Foundation seeks out anomalies across land, air, and sea, and they've encountered just about everything. From roller coaster cars rocketing through the Midwestern skies to world-destroying horrors deep underground in alternate dimensions. So it's no surprise to hear that they've happened upon something right out of an old sailor's ghostly tale. An actual, real-life ghost ship. You can almost smell the salty sea air and hear the eerie drone of a foghorn just thinking about it. But of course, with the SCP Foundation, it's never simple. It's never just a ghost ship, but something more lurking beneath the surface of that chilly sea. Several years ago, in Arcachon Bay, on the southwest coast of France, something unusual began to happen. Between nautical twilight on one day and nautical twilight on the next, a mysterious ship would appear. It was a 19th century brig with 2 square-rigged masts. It would materialize from nothing, simply fading into existence and sailing around the bay. The first sighting was reported by an elderly man in a fishing boat, who stated that, as the ghostly ship drew closer to him, his own vessel stopped responding to his control. He jerked the wheel back and forth, attempting to steer away from the brig, but the boat would not respond to his direction. Suddenly, as if yanked by an unseen force, the fishing boat was pulled underwater all at once. The fisherman luckily was able to grab a life preserver and free himself from the boat. He floated alone for hours until he was spotted by another passing boat. He tried to tell them of the unusual ship he had seen and what had happened, but by then the brig had disappeared. The ship continued to appear on a regular basis, every time staying within a kilometer of its original manifestation point, always at the same time of day. Its effect on nearby ships and vessels was consistent too, unfortunately for anyone who happened to be in the water at the same time. Wheels, pedals, and other methods of directional movement would stop working, and the vessel would be pulled underwater. Most of the time, the people on board drowned. After a pattern was established and it became clear that the ship was definitely anomalous, the Foundation designated it SCP-5987. A 3-kilometer radius was set up around the ship, blocking off the sea and air traffic. Unfortunately, this was not enough to prevent people from entering the radius anyway. As more and more civilians sighted the ship and the drownings became increasingly difficult to cover up, the Foundation decided to attempt to neutralize the ship. A task force was approved to search the area for anything that could be used to put the apparition to an end. As it turns out, sometimes the rules the old ghost stories teach you are true. You need to figure out the correct way to put an angry ghost to rest. On January 1st, 2019, the SCPS submarine Nephthys was deployed in the bay with Captain Domer at its helm. The submarine approached SCP-5987, and as it entered its area, the communication system went down and the submarine was pulled underwater. SCP Foundation Command attempted to re-establish communication with the submarine, and after several tries, it was able to get through. Captain Domer reported that the submarine was partially damaged from colliding with the ocean floor, but was still safe and operational. The communication system had come back online once the submarine had reached the bottom, and the pull of SCP-5967 had ceased. The research team deliberated over what their next step would be, but their decision was made for them. When SCP-5987 retreated further from the submarine and raised a white flag from its mainmast. At this point, Nephthys was instructed to proceed to the point where the brig had first appeared. The submarine reached the manifestation point, where they spotted wooden and steel pieces jutting out of the ocean floor. Noting that this was clear evidence of a shipwreck, Nephthys switched to search mode to focus further on the small wooden wreck. Captain Domer then deployed the diving team to clear out the wreckage and inspect it for anything significant. Several skeletons were found, corroded by the salt water to varying degrees. As spectrally significant remains do not decay or corrode, according to Foundation research, the skeletons were deemed unimportant to the mission and left where they were found. One of the divers, Agent Lacroix, found a carved figurehead resembling a siren or a mermaid beneath the hull. Unlike every other part of the ship, the figurehead was not damaged at all, completely untouched by the elements. It was collected and brought aboard the submarine to be taken back to the Foundation for further study. As the submarine returned to the surface and made its way back across the bay, the chime of a bell rang out across the water. As the sound faded from the air, SCP-5987 faded from view. The next day, when nautical twilight rolled around, the brig was nowhere to be seen. Removing the figurehead, whatever its significance was, had somehow tamed the ghostly ship. But what was the ship? Where did it come from? What did the figurehead have to do with it at all? The figurehead, designated SCP-5987-1, was brought back to Foundation Area 34 and examined by the Marine Studies Department. After some time, they were able to trace its origin. SCP-5987 once sat at the front of the Duc de Dantzig, a French privateer brig from the early 19th century, though analysis of its material indicates it was made 200 years before the construction of the ship. The figurehead has some unusual properties that set it apart from the rest of the wreckage found in the bay. It is able to control all seafaring vessels within a kilometer, sinking them or running them aground. It was on the Duc de Dantzig when it sank in 1811 after being burned at sea. This experience was extreme enough that it created a spectral imprint on the location. An old American Secure Containment Initiative file provided additional insight into the origins of SCP-5987 and the events leading to its demise. The file described Item 6789-AH, a humanoid with possible ontokinetic properties, named François Aregnaudeau. He was a French corsair, captain of the Duc de Dantzig. A bounty of 10,000 francs was placed on his head by a group known as the American Secure Containment Initiative, a precursor to the SCP Foundation from the 19th century, with a bounty of an additional 100 francs for each member of his crew. According to the file, Aregnaudeau was believed to have been some sort of anomalous being. This assumption was formed from observations of the captain physically controlling the paths of other ships within his line of sight. While standing on the bow of the Duc de Dantzig, Aregnaudeau was able to manipulate the riggings and sails of enemy ships in any way he wanted. Some of the ships were pulled underwater, their crews drowned. Others were dashed against rocks and destroyed. Some others were run aground and looted. This ability allowed the captain to rise through the ranks of the French military, capturing over 20 military and merchant ships in less than 10 years. The initiative planned to capture the captain when he disembarked his ship and sink the ship in order to prevent him from escaping custody. However, before they could implement their plan, his own crew beat them to it. While the exact details of what happened are unknown, an 1812 report published in a French newspaper described an encounter between a Navy ship and the Duc de Dantzig. They spotted the ship floating at sea, bobbing on the waves and heading in no particular direction. Concerned, the Navy crew determined the best course of action was to reach out to the crew of the other ship and determine if they were Frenchmen in need of assistance. As the Navy ship drew closer, the crew was perplexed and worried by a heavy silence that hung over the other ship. There was no noise coming from the deck, no yells for help, no shouted orders, only the slap of the water on wood. The ship did not appear to be damaged at all either. There was no sign of cannon fire that might have blown out a part of the ship, nor was there any damage from a recent storm. There was nothing that should have been keeping the ship from continuing on its course. The Navy ship came up beside the Duc de Dantzig, with a group of sailors preparing to board it. As they climbed aboard, they were horrified at what they found. The deck was positively drenched in blood, smeared across its surface as if the entire crew of at least 50 men had emptied their veins right onto it. As the Navy men continued their search, the source of the blood soon became entirely too clear. The ropes had been turned into makeshift nooses, corpses hanging from them and swinging limply. Some other bodies were strewn across the deck, abdomens ripped open and their entrails yanked out, thrown to the side. Others had their faces collapsed by cannonballs, even though there were no signs of enemy fire. A closer look revealed that the blasts had come from their own cannons, turned on themselves, aimed at their own faces, and fired. The captain himself, reeking of death and putrefaction, had been tied to the main mast. Swords were stabbed through his hands and his feet, like a crucifixion. The naval officers made their way to the hold, where they found bloodied papers identifying the ship. They were uncertain what had happened, but posited that the crew had gone mad while lost at sea, turning on the captain and then each other. To be safe, they decided to set the ship on fire and leave it there to sink to the bottom of a watery grave. With Captain François Aregnaudeau disposed of, though not by them, the initiative closed their case file on him and the story was forgotten. At least it was until the 2019 mission to investigate SCP-5987. With the discovery of the figurehead from the wreckage, a centuries-old mystery was solved. According to the researchers tasked with examining the figurehead, it resented having to do the work of war and destruction and disliked working at the beck and call of the Duc de Dantzig and its captain. Somehow it compelled the crew to destroy each other and the captain in an attempt to free itself. When the naval officers discovered the carnage and set the ship ablaze, it was traumatic enough that whatever supernatural force powers the figurehead left a spectral disturbance behind. The designation SCP-5987 was then created. SCP-5987 has been treated for saltwater protection and attached to a historically accurate miniature 19th century sailing ship. The ship with the figurehead attached is kept in a saltwater enclosure in Area 34's Marine Observatory. It is checked once a month for any signs of damage or degradation. The figurehead uses its ability to control ships to sail its new home around the saltwater enclosure. It seems to enjoy spending its time this way, and several of the officers assigned to guard the enclosure have reported hearing voices singing the French sea shanty, "Boney was a warrior." When the guards opened the door to look for the source of the voices, however, they could not find a source. Somehow the figurehead is able to sing as it sails around its miniature sea. It's not every day that an SCP has a happy ending, but this seems to be one of those rare cases. The ghost ship sightings have ceased altogether. The case has been closed, and the anomaly is at rest. It's not hard to imagine that the figurehead is enjoying its new peaceful life, no longer forced to sink ships or be used as a weapon of war. Instead, it can simply float and sing its songs. Now go check out SCP-1861, the crew of the HMS Wintersheimer, and a Sea Snails Fantasy SCP-1867, a Gentleman, for more horrors and oddities of the high seas.